Zinnia Calloway, 32, stood in the pristine hospital corridor, clutching her phone with trembling hands as she reread the message from her father. "We simply can't help with Ethan's treatment. We've discussed it and it's just not possible right now." Her son was dying behind that door, and her own parents had just chosen her sister's extravagant wedding over his life. Nothing would ever be the same after this betrayal, and the revenge Zinnia would take would shake her family to its very core. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family betrayal already has your blood boiling, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life karma stories. Trust me, the way justice gets served in this family drama is something you won't want to miss. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston, Zinnia always knew she was different from her sister Amber. While Amber excelled at everything she touched, straight-A student homecoming queen star athlete Zinnia struggled to find her place. Their parents, Richard and Eleanor Calloway, made no attempt to hide their favoritism. Richard, a successful investment banker, and Eleanor, a former beauty queen turned charity fundraiser, had meticulously planned Amber's life from the moment she was born. "Amber is special," Eleanor would often say within Zinnia's earshot. "She's destined for greatness." Meanwhile, Zinnia's achievements were met with lukewarm acknowledgement at best. When she graduated with honors in English literature, her father's only comment was, "At least you finished." When she landed her first publishing job, her mother wondered aloud if it would pay enough to support herself. The message was clear: Amber was the investment, Zinnia was the afterthought. Despite the obvious favoritism, Zinnia maintained a relationship with her family, believing that blood was thicker than water. She attended family gatherings, sent thoughtful birthday gifts, and called her parents weekly. She desperately wanted to believe that beneath the surface inequities, her parents loved her just as much as they loved Amber. When Zinnia met Marcus during a publishing conference in New York, she felt truly seen for the first time in her life. Marcus was kind, ambitious, and utterly devoted to her. Within a year, they were married in a modest ceremony at a botanical garden. Her parents attended but complained about the simplicity of the event and left early. Amber didn't come at all, citing an impromptu weekend getaway with friends that couldn't be rescheduled. 2 years later, when Zinnia gave birth to Ethan, she thought things might change. Surely becoming grandparents would soften her parents' hearts, would make them see the value in her quiet, meaningful life. But when they visited the hospital, Eleanor spent most of the time on the phone with Amber, discussing her latest achievement, making partner at her prestigious law firm. Richard held baby Ethan awkwardly for exactly 3 minutes before handing him back, commenting that he looked a bit small compared to Amber when she was born. As Ethan grew, the disparity only widened. For Amber's birthdays, there were lavish parties and expensive gifts. For Ethan's, there were belated cards with modest checks. When Amber completed her MBA, Richard and Eleanor threw a gala celebration that cost more than Zinnia's entire wedding. When Zinnia published her first novel to critical acclaim, they didn't even read it. "You know how busy we are with Amber's career advancement," Eleanor explained when Zinnia confronted her. "She's representing major corporations now. It's important for the family name." The family name. As if Zinnia and her son weren't part of that legacy. The final blow came when Amber announced her engagement to Bradley Worthington III, heir to a hotel empire. Richard and Eleanor were ecstatic, immediately offering to fund a wedding that would be the social event of the season. No expense would be spared. They hired celebrity wedding planners, booked a historic castle in Scotland, and arranged for private jets to transport guests. The initial budget of $150,000 quickly ballooned to $230,000 as Amber's demands grew more extravagant. "She deserves the very best," Richard said during a rare family dinner where the conversation revolved entirely around wedding plans. We've set aside a significant portion of our savings for this. It's an investment in her future. Zinnia sat silently pushing food around her plate, wondering if they'd ever considered investing in her future or her son's. But she said nothing, swallowing her hurt, as she had done countless times before. What was the point? In their eyes, she would always be the lesser daughter. She didn't know then that in just 3 months her world would collapse entirely, and the true depth of her family's betrayal would be revealed in the most devastating way possible. Her son's life would hang in the balance, and the choice her parents would make would sever the last threads holding their family together. The stage was being set for a reckoning that none of them were prepared for, least of all the golden child who had never had to fight for anything in her life. The first sign that something was wrong with Ethan came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Zinnia was preparing breakfast when she noticed her 5-year-old son's hands trembling as he reached for his cereal bowl. Initially, she dismissed it as excitement or too much sugar the day before. But when the tremors persisted for a week, accompanied by increasing fatigue and occasional headaches, maternal instinct overrode rationalization. The pediatrician listened to Zinnia's concerns with a gravity that made her stomach clench. "Let's run some tests," Dr. Reynolds said carefully, her eyes not quite meeting Zinnia's. "Just to rule things out." 3 days and countless blood draws later, Dr. Reynolds called Zinnia and Marcus into her office. The words "rare autoimmune encephalitis" fell like bombs in the sterile room. The condition was attacking Ethan's brain, causing inflammation that would progressively worsen without intervention. The tremors were just the beginning. Without treatment, the prognosis is... Doctor? Reynolds hesitated, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "It's not good, but there's hope. A specialized immunotherapy treatment has shown remarkable results in cases like Ethan's." The hope flickered, then dimmed when the doctor mentioned the cost. The treatment protocol was experimental, not covered by insurance, and would require $85,000 upfront. Zinnia and Marcus exchanged glances, the same thought mirrored in their eyes. They didn't have that kind of money. Marcus's job as a high school English teacher and Zinnia's modest income from her writing barely covered their mortgage and everyday expenses. They had some savings, but nowhere near enough. They'd exhausted much of their emergency fund the previous year when Marcus needed surgery after a car accident. "We'll figure it out," Marcus said firmly, squeezing Zinnia's hand. "Whatever it takes." The next week became a blur of second opinions that only confirmed the diagnosis. Frantic research into treatment alternatives, there were none as effective, and desperate attempts to gather funds. They started a GoFundMe campaign that raised $12,000, generous but far from sufficient. They looked into loans, but their existing debt from Marcus's medical bills and student loans made approval unlikely for the amount they needed. As Ethan's condition deteriorated, the tremors, worsening balance becoming an issue, speech occasionally slurring, Zinnia made the call she'd been dreading. With Marcus's encouragement, she reached out to her parents. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." Zinnia began, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. She explained Ethan's condition, clearly detailing the recommended treatment and its cost. She wasn't asking for charity, she emphasized. They could work out a repayment plan. This was about saving her son's life. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably before her father cleared his throat. "That's quite a sum, Zinnia. Have you explored all other options?" "Yes, Dad. We've tried everything," she replied, frustration creeping into her tone. "This is our last resort." "We'll need to discuss this," her mother interjected. "Call us back tomorrow." The next 24 hours were excruciating. Zinnia allowed herself to hope to believe that despite everything, her parents would step up when it truly mattered. They had the money. The extravagant wedding budget for Amber was proof of that. Surely they wouldn't choose flowers and cake over their grandson's life. When she called back, her father answered with a businesslike tone that sent ice through her veins before he even spoke the words. We've looked at our finances and it's just not possible right now, Richard said. With Amber's wedding in 2 months, we've already allocated our available funds. Perhaps you could delay the treatment or find a less expensive alternative. Zinnia was speechless, her mind struggling to process the casual cruelty of suggesting she delay life-saving treatment for her child. There is no alternative, she finally managed, her voice a whisper. And Ethan doesn't have time to wait. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, her father replied, sounding more annoyed than sorry. But we have commitments. Amber's wedding has been planned for over a year. The deposits are non-refundable. Non-refundable deposits are more important than your grandson's life. Zinnia's whisper had become a shout. He could die, Dad. Her mother came on the line, then her voice tight with disapproval. Don't be dramatic, Zinnia. You've always had a flair for exaggeration. I'm sure things aren't as dire as you're making them out to be. Besides, we can't just cancel Amber's wedding. Do you know how many important people are coming? This could affect her entire career, her future. The conversation ended with vague promises to see what they could do after the wedding, and suggestions that Zinnia was being impulsive by insisting on this particular treatment. The unspoken message was clear: Amber's social standing trumped Ethan's existence. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Zinnia collapsed into Marcus's arms, sobbing as she recounted the conversation. How could they? She kept asking. How could anyone choose a party over a child's life? Marcus held her, his own tears falling silently. We'll find another way, he promised, though both knew they were running out of options. What neither of them realized was that this rejection would not only change their relationship with the Callaways forever, but would set in motion a chain of events that would expose decades of family secrets and ultimately bring the mighty Richard and Eleanor Callaway to their knees. The reckoning was coming, and it would arrive from the most unexpected direction. The day after her parents' rejection, Zinnia sat in Ethan's hospital room watching him sleep fitfully. His condition had worsened to the point where the doctors recommended monitoring him overnight. The tremors had given way to occasional seizures, and his once vibrant energy had dimmed to a fragile spark. She held his small hand, tracing the outline of his fingers, trying not to think about how they might never grow larger if the treatment didn't happen soon. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up, expecting a nurse or doctor, but instead found herself staring at her grandfather, Bernard Callaway. At 85, Bernard was a commanding presence despite his age, tall, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through pretense. He had built the family fortune from nothing, creating a financial consulting firm that Richard later expanded. Bernard had semi-retired 15 years ago, maintaining only nominal involvement in the company while traveling extensively. His relationship with Richard and Eleanor was cordial but distant, marked by occasional disagreements over business practices and family values. Grandpa, Zinnia whispered, surprised. She hadn't seen him in over 2 years. He'd been living in his Montana ranch, choosing solitude over the Boston social scene her parents cherished. Bernard moved to her side, his eyes taking in Ethan's pale form before meeting hers. Marcus called me, he said simply. Told me everything. Zinnia blinked back, fresh tears. She hadn't known Marcus had her grandfather's contact information, let alone that he'd reached out to him. Your husband is a good man, Bernard continued, pulling up a chair beside her. Better than the entitled peacock Amber's marrying, that's for damn sure. Despite everything, Zinnia found herself smiling weakly. Bernard had never been one to mince words. Now he said, his voice taking on the no-nonsense tone she remembered from childhood, "Tell me exactly what the doctors say this boy of yours needs." For the next hour, Zinnia detailed Ethan's condition, the recommended treatment, and her parents' refusal to help. Bernard listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each passing minute. $230, 000, for a wedding, he muttered, when she finished. Obscene. And not a penny for this child's life. He shook his head, disgust evident in every line of his face. Richard was always a fool about money, showing it off rather than using it wisely. But this? He gestured toward Ethan. This crosses a line I didn't think even he would cross. Bernard stood abruptly, pulling out his phone. Step outside with me a moment, Zinnia. In the hallway, he made a call to his lawyer, instructing him to wire $100,000 to the hospital immediately for Ethan's treatment, with the remainder to go directly to Zinnia and Marcus. That should cover the treatment and give you some breathing room for his recovery, Bernard said, tucking his phone away. The money will be here by morning. Zinnia stared at him in disbelief, emotions overwhelming her. Grandpa, we can't possibly. You can and you will, he cut her off firmly. This isn't charity, Zinnia. This is family, taking care of family, the way it should be. He hesitated, then added more softly. Besides, there's something you don't know. Something I should have told you years ago, when I first saw how Richard and Eleanor treated you differently. Zinnia felt a strange prickling at the back of her neck. What do you mean? Bernard glanced around the empty hallway, then led her to a small waiting area. Once seated, he took her hands in his weathered ones. Your father, Richard? He isn't my biological son. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible at first. What? Your grandmother had an affair, Bernard explained, his voice devoid of bitterness after so many years. With her tennis instructor, of all the clichés. I found out when Richard was about 2. She confessed everything, begged forgiveness. I gave it to her and I raised Richard as my own. Never told him the truth. Zinnia struggled to process this revelation. Does Dad know? No. Your grandmother and I agreed never to tell him. She passed believing the secret died with her. He squeezed Zinnia's hands. But here's what matters, I chose Richard. I chose to be his father in every way that counts, just as he should be choosing his grandson now. The implication slowly dawned on Zinnia. So when you see how they treat me versus Amber, Bernard nodded grimly. It's history repeating itself in the worst way. Eleanor comes from old money values, bloodlines, and social connections above all else. I've long suspected she somehow discovered Richard isn't a true Calloway by blood, though I can't prove it. But look how they favor Amber, who is the spitting image of Eleanor's family, while you. I look like you, Zinnia finished softly. She had always been told she resembled her grandfather with the same blue eyes and determined jaw, features conspicuously absent in her father and sister. You're more a Calloway than either of them, Bernard confirmed. And not just in looks. You have integrity, compassion, the values this family was actually built on before Richard and Eleanor corrupted them with their social climbing and materialism. He stood again suddenly, looking every one of his 85 years. I've let this go on too long, watching from the sidelines. No more. It's time for some long overdue changes in this family. The look in his eyes sent a shiver down Zinnia's spine. It wasn't just determination she saw there, it was the glint of calculated retribution. What are you going to do? She asked, both fearful and curious. Bernard smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. First, we save your boy. Then we remind Richard and Eleanor what truly matters. And what happens when they forget? As they returned to Ethan's room, Zinnia's mind whirled with revelations and possibilities. The money for Ethan's treatment was a miracle, but her grandfather's unexpected support offered something equally valuable: validation that her feelings of exclusion weren't imagined, and the promise that for once the golden child wouldn't be the one who got everything she wanted. What Zinnia didn't yet realize was that Bernard had set in motion plans far beyond a simple family confrontation. The reckoning brewing would shake the very foundations of the Calloway name and force everyone to confront truths they'd spent decades avoiding. The wedding that had been prioritized over Ethan's life would become the stage for a drama no one had anticipated. Least of all, Amber, who had never in her life had to face the consequences of her privilege. Ethan's treatment began on a Wednesday morning exactly 9 days after Bernard's intervention. The specialized immunotherapy protocol required careful administration, and the hospital had assembled a team of experts for the case. Dr. Patel, the neurologist overseeing Ethan's care, had cautioned them about the road ahead. The treatment itself takes 6 weeks, she explained. But we should see initial improvement within days if he's responding well. The first 72 hours are critical. Zinnia barely left the hospital, sleeping on the uncomfortable pull-out chair beside Ethan's bed while Marcus alternated between being with them and continuing to work to keep their health insurance active. The strain was visible on both their faces, but beneath the exhaustion flickered a tentative hope that had been absent before Bernard's arrival. On the 3rd day of treatment, Ethan's tremors showed subtle signs of decreasing. By the 5th day, he was able to hold a crayon without shaking, creating a wobbly drawing of their family, Zinnia, Marcus himself, and touchingly great-grandpa Bernie standing beside a mountain. He's responding beautifully, Dr. Patel confirmed during her morning rounds, genuine relief evident in her smile. His inflammatory markers are decreasing, and the latest brain scan shows reduction in swelling. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is exactly what we want to see at this stage. The news should have been purely joyful, but it came with a bittersweet edge for Zinnia. Every milestone in Ethan's recovery was a reminder of what her parents had refused to make possible. Every improvement was a life saved not by those who should have stepped forward first, but by the intervention of an elderly man who understood what family truly meant. Richard and Eleanor hadn't called once since rejecting her plea for help. Their silence spoke volumes about their priorities as Amber's wedding approached, now just 6 weeks away. Bernard, by contrast, visited daily, bringing books for Ethan and taking genuine interest in his progress. During one of these visits, while Ethan napped, Bernard handed Zinnia a thick manila envelope. "What's this?" she asked, weighing it in her hands. "Insurance," Bernard replied cryptically. "And ammunition. Open it when you're alone." That night, after Marcus took over the hospital vigil and Zinnia returned home to shower and change, she finally opened the envelope. Inside were documents that made her blood run cold, then hot with anger. Bank statements, property deeds, tax records, business agreements, all pointing to one shocking conclusion: her parents had been systematically siphoning money from Bernard's trust for years. The scheme was sophisticated but clear once laid out. Richard had convinced Bernard to establish a family trust years ago, ostensibly for tax benefits. As trustee, Richard had legal access but was bound by fiduciary duty to manage it for all beneficiaries, including Bernard himself, Zinnia, and eventually Ethan. Instead, he had created elaborate channels to divert funds to personal accounts and shell companies controlled by himself and Eleanor. A note in Bernard's handwriting explained, "I suspected for years, but couldn't prove it until recently. My new accountant found the discrepancies last month. They've taken nearly $3.4 million that should have been preserved for the entire family, including you and Ethan." Zinnia sat motionless at her kitchen table, documents spread before her, trying to process this new betrayal layered atop the existing one. All those years of her parents claiming they couldn't help with her student loans, couldn't contribute to her modest wedding, couldn't assist when Marcus needed surgery, while they were secretly enriching themselves with money that partially belonged to her. The final page in the packet was a letter from Bernard's attorney outlining the legal options available. Bernard had not yet filed charges or confronted Richard, leaving that decision in Zinnia's hands. Her phone rang, startling her from her shocked reverie. It was Marcus. "Ethan's asking for you," he said, his voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "He's hungry for the first time in days." "Actually hungry, Zin. Dr. Patel says it's a great sign." The joy of this news collided with the anger burning through her veins, creating a strange clarity. For years, she had accepted her role as the family's afterthought, believing that maintaining peace was worth swallowing her hurt. But now, with evidence of her parents' true nature laid bare, that passive acceptance evaporated. They had stolen from the family trust money that could have helped her son without requiring Bernard's intervention. Money that was rightfully meant for all of them, including Ethan. A cold determination settled in her chest as she gathered the documents back into the envelope. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she told Marcus. "And after I see Ethan, there's something important we need to discuss." Hey everyone, I know you're probably on the edge of your seat right now, wondering what I'm going to do with this bombshell information about my parents' fraud. Before I continue with what happened next, I want to thank you all for the amazing support in the comments. If you're feeling as angry as I was in that moment, hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. You definitely won't want to miss how this family secret explodes at my sister's lavish wedding. The karma that's coming is something you have to see to believe. In the hospital that evening after Ethan had fallen asleep, Zinnia showed Marcus the documents. His face darkened as he understood the implications. "They had the money all along," he whispered, disbelief and anger warring in his voice. "They could have saved Ethan without even feeling it financially, and they chose not to." "It's worse than that," Zinnia replied, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "They've been stealing from a fund that legally belongs partly to us and to Ethan. Money that could have prevented all this suffering." Marcus took her hand, his expression grave. "What do you want to do?" The question hung between them, heavy with potential consequences. Any action they took would permanently alter their family dynamics, burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. But looking at their son peaceful in sleep for the first time in weeks, Zinnia found she no longer cared about preserving relationships built on lies and inequity. "I want justice," she said simply. "Not just for us, but for Grandpa Bernard too. They've betrayed everyone who truly cares about family." Together they formulated a plan. It wouldn't be immediate, Ethan's recovery remained their priority, but it would be thorough. Bernard's attorney provided guidance on legal options, but it was Zinnia who suggested the timing. Amber's wedding, she said, the irony not lost on her. The event they prioritized over Ethan's life. It's perfect. The following weeks passed in a dual reality. On one track, Ethan continued his remarkable recovery. The seizures stopped entirely, his energy returned, and by week 4 of treatment, Dr. Patel was using the word remission with cautious optimism. On the parallel track, Zinnia, Marcus, and Bernard meticulously gathered evidence and prepared legal documents with the help of Bernard's attorney, Simon Blackwell. "We could file criminal charges," Simon advised during a meeting in Bernard's hotel suite. "The evidence is compelling. But there are other approaches that might serve your goals better." "I don't want them in jail," Bernard clarified, surprising Zinnia. "I want them to face what they've done, yes, but Richard is still the boy I raised, whatever his biological origins. What I want is for them to understand the depth of their moral failure, and for the family legacy to be protected for those who truly deserve it." He looked meaningfully at Zinnia and added, "I've already changed my will. The company and the bulk of my estate will bypass Richard entirely, going into a new trust for you, Marcus and Ethan. I've also designated you, Zinnia, as the executor." Zinnia was stunned by this declaration. "Grandpa, are you sure the company has been in our name for generations?" Bernard nodded firmly. "And it will continue to be. Just under the stewardship of a Calloway who understands what that name should stand for." The plan they ultimately crafted was elegant in its simplicity. They would confront Richard and Eleanor privately just before Amber's wedding with evidence of their financial misconduct. They would present terms. Either Richard and Eleanor would make full restitution to the family trust, publicly acknowledge their treatment of Zinnia, and Ethan had been unconscionable, and stepped down from their positions at Calloway Financial with dignified retirement packages, or Bernard would file criminal charges and ensure the scandal became very public. They care about their social standing more than anything, Zinnia observed. This gives them a choice between private humiliation with financial consequences or public humiliation with legal ones. What none of them anticipated was how quickly their carefully laid plans would be derailed, or how much more devastating the public reckoning would become when Amber herself unexpectedly entered the equation. 2 days before Amber's wedding, the Calloway family converged on Edinburgh, Scotland. The 12th century castle that would serve as the venue had been transformed into a fairy tale setting at astronomical expense. Flowers flown in from 3 continents filled every conceivable space. Crystal chandeliers had been installed in the medieval banquet hall. A team of 50 staff members scurried about attending to last-minute details under the watchful eye of celebrity wedding planner Vivienne Street. Claire, Zinnia and Marcus arrived with Ethan, who was now strong enough to travel, though still taking medication. Bernard had arranged for them to stay in the same luxury hotel as the rest of the wedding party, despite Eleanor's attempts to place them in more modest accommodations across town. The entire family stays together, Bernard had insisted in a tone that brooked no argument. Or I don't attend at all. Since Bernard was contributing significantly to the wedding, costs of fact Richard and Eleanor had conveniently forgotten to mention to Zinnia, his ultimatum carried weight. And so the stage was set for the confrontation planned for the following morning, the day before the wedding. Amber, meanwhile, was in full bridezilla mode, micromanaging every detail and treating the staff with thinly veiled contempt. When she encountered Zinnia in the hotel lobby that evening, her greeting was cool at best. "Oh, you actually came," she said, her perfectly manicured hand adjusting her designer sunglasses, though they were indoors. "And you brought everyone." Her gaze swept dismissively over Marcus and Ethan. "We wouldn't miss it," Zinnia replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Family is everything, isn't it?" Something in Zinnia's tone must have registered because Amber's expression flickered momentarily before she regained her practiced poise. "Well, just make sure the child doesn't disrupt anything. This wedding has been meticulously planned." "Yes, I'm aware of exactly how much planning has gone into it," Zinnia said, the double meaning clear only to her. "By the way, Ethan is doing much better now, not that you asked." Amber had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "Yes, Mom mentioned he was ill. Glad to hear he's improved." She glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch. "I have to run meeting with the florist. See you at the rehearsal dinner." As she sashayed away, Marcus squeezed Zinnia's hand. "You okay?" Zinnia nodded, watching her sister's retreating form. "Better than okay. For the first time I see her clearly. She's not special, she's just spoiled. There's a difference." The rehearsal dinner that night was a lavish affair held in a private dining room overlooking Edinburgh Castle. 80 guests, just the intimate pre-wedding gathering, dined on a 7-course meal paired with rare wines. Richard and Eleanor presided over the event, like royalty basking in the admiration of their social circle. Zinnia observed them through new eyes, noting how her father's laugh seemed forced, how her mother's smile never quite reached her eyes. These were not happy people, despite their wealth and status. They were performers forever seeking validation from an audience that would discard them the moment their fortunes turned. Bernard sat beside Zinnia, watching the spectacle with thinly veiled disdain. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "all this pretense ends." But fate had other plans. As coffee and dessert were being served, Amber's fiancé Bradley stood tapping his glass for attention. His handsome face, usually arranged in an expression of bland pleasantness, looked unusually tense. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming," he began conventionally enough. "Especially those who've traveled from overseas to be with us on our special day." Polite applause followed this statement. Bradley took a deep breath, then continued, his voice taking on an edge that immediately silenced the room. However, I feel it's important to address something before we proceed any further. Earlier today, I received some disturbing information that I've spent the last few hours verifying. Amber looked up at him, confusion evident in her expression. This clearly wasn't part of the planned speeches. It has come to my attention. Bradley continued, his voice now glacial, that the Calloway family finances are not what they appear to be. In fact, there are serious allegations of embezzlement and fraud that may soon become public. A collective gasp went through the room. Richard half rose from his seat, his face flushing dangerously. "What the hell are you talking about? This is outrageous." Bradley ignored him, focusing instead on Amber. "Did you know about this? That your father has been stealing from your grandfather's trust for years? That the money for this wedding, our wedding, is essentially stolen?" Amber's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her face draining of color. Zinnia felt as though she'd been plunged into ice water. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Their confrontation was planned for the morning in private. How had Bradley discovered the information? Her eyes met Bernard's, who looked equally stunned. Then she noticed Simon Blackwell, Bernard's attorney, shifting uncomfortably at a nearby table. The pieces fell into place. Simon must have connections to Bradley's family or legal team. Information had leaked. The room descended into chaos. Guests murmured in shock. Eleanor began to cry theatrically. Richard continued to splutter denials that sounded hollow even to the uninitiated. Bradley raised his hand, silencing the room once more. "I've been advised by my family's legal counsel to distance myself from this situation immediately. The Worthington name cannot be associated with financial impropriety." He turned to Amber, his expression cold. "The wedding is off." Amber finally found her voice, rising to her feet in fury. "You can't do this to me. Do you have any idea how much work has gone into this wedding? How many important people are coming?" "That's your concern right now?" Bradley asked incredulously. "Your reputation. Not whether the accusations are true." "Of course they're not true," Amber snapped, but her eyes darted to her father uncertainly. Richard had gone very still, his earlier bluster fading into something more calculated. "This is a private family matter that has been grossly misrepresented," he said with forced calm. "Bradley, let's discuss this like civilized people away from our guests." "There's nothing to discuss," Bradley replied. "My family has a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of scandal. I wish you all the best sorting it out, but I won't be part of it." With that, he placed his napkin precisely on the table and walked out, followed by his parents and several guests who appeared eager to distance themselves from the unfolding drama. In the stunned silence that followed, all eyes turned to Richard, then to Bernard, as though seeking confirmation or denial of the accusations. But it was Zinnia who stood, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "It's true," she said simply. "All of it. Dad has been embezzling from the family trust for years. Money that belonged to all of us, including my son, who almost died because Mom and Dad refused to help with his medical treatment, claiming they couldn't afford it because of this wedding." She gestured around at the opulent surroundings. "They chose all this over a child's life. Their own grandson." The public confrontation she had hoped to avoid was happening anyway, and now that it had begun, there was no turning back. The guests sat in stunned silence as Zinnia's words hung in the air. Eleanor was the first to recover her practiced social smile, slipping into place like armor. "Zinnia has always had a flair for the dramatic," she said with a nervous laugh. "This is absurd." "Richard, tell them this is absurd." But Richard remained frozen, his face a mask of calculation rather than outrage, which told its own story. Amber stared at her sister, then at her parents', realization dawning slowly. "Is it true?" she whispered, her voice no longer that of the entitled bride, but of a confused child. "Dad, Mom, did you really refuse to help Ethan?" Before either could respond, Bernard stood, commanding the room's attention through sheer presence despite his age. "I have the bank, records, the transfer, documents, the trust agreements, all of it," he said gravely. Richard and Eleanor have stolen approximately $3.4 million from funds that rightfully belong to the entire family, including Zinnia and her son. The room erupted again, guests whispering furiously, several more standing to leave. Eleanor's social circle was disintegrating before her eyes, and her composure finally shattered. "You have no right," she shrieked at Bernard. "That money was needed to maintain our position, to secure Amber's future. What about my son's future?" Zinnia countered, her voice rising. "He was dying and you chose a wedding over his life." The rehearsal dinner ended in shambles. Guests fled the scene of the family implosion, eager to avoid association with scandal, yet equally eager to spread the gossip. By midnight, the Calloway name was trending on social media, with fragmentary accounts of financial misconduct and family betrayal multiplying across platforms. In the hotel suite she shared with Marcus and Ethan, Zinnia sat in stunned silence, trying to process how quickly everything had unraveled. The confrontation she had planned, controlled private with clear demands, had morphed into a public spectacle that could not be contained. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, holding her hand as Ethan slept peacefully in the adjoining room, blissfully unaware of the family drama. "I don't know," Zinnia admitted. "This wasn't the plan." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. When Marcus opened it, Amber stood in the hallway, her designer outfit replaced by sweatpants and a t-shirt, her face bare of makeup and streaked with tears. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. Zinnia hesitated, then nodded. This version of her sister, vulnerable, stripped of her golden child armor, was unfamiliar territory. Amber perched awkwardly on the edge of a chair, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Is it really true about Ethan, that he was seriously ill and Mom and Dad refused to help?" "Yes," Zinnia replied simply. "He has autoimmune encephalitis. Without treatment, he would have died or suffered permanent brain damage. The treatment cost $85,000, which insurance wouldn't cover. We begged Mom and Dad for help, and they refused because they'd committed all their available funds to your wedding." Amber flinched as if slapped. "I didn't know," she whispered. "They never told me." "I would have. I mean, it's a child's life versus a party. Who would choose a party?" "They would," Marcus said, his tone hard. "And did." "What about the embezzlement?" Amber asked, turning to face Zinnia directly. "Is that part true too?" Zinnia nodded, retrieving the manila envelope from her suitcase. "Grandpa Bernard discovered it recently. Dad has been systematically stealing from the family trust for years, money that legally belongs to all of us, including Ethan." She handed Amber several of the most damning documents. As Amber read, her expression shifted from disbelief to horror, to something harder to define, perhaps the beginning of understanding how fundamentally she had misperceived her own family. "All those years," she said, finally looking up at Zinnia. "The way they favored me, gave me everything while you got scraps. I thought. I believed I was just special somehow. That I deserved it." She let out a bitter laugh. "God, I was so blind. So entitled." "You were a child," Zinnia replied, surprising herself with the lack of recrimination in her voice. "Children believe what their parents tell them. You didn't create the dynamic, you just benefited from it. And perpetuated it," Amber added with newfound self-awareness. "I could have questioned it as an adult. I could have shared more with you. Instead, I just accepted my position as the favorite and never looked back." A silence fell between them, decades of unspoken hurt and privilege stretching like a chasm. Finally, Amber spoke again, her voice steadier. "What are you going to do now, legally, I mean?" "Originally, we planned to confront Mom and Dad privately before the wedding, give them a chance to make restitution and retire quietly to avoid public scandal," Zinnia explained. "But now it's too late for that," Amber finished for her. "The scandal is already public." Another knock interrupted them, more forceful this time. Bernard entered, followed by Simon Blackwell. Both looked grim but resolved. Richard and Eleanor are attempting damage control, Bernard informed them. They're claiming the financial allegations are a misunderstanding and that the situation with Ethan was exaggerated for sympathy. That's a lie, Marcus exclaimed, anger flashing in his eyes. Of course it is, Bernard agreed. But they're desperate. Richard has already called several business associates asking for help containing the situation. He's also contacted the family lawyer to try to challenge my control of the main trust. Can he do that? Zinnia asked, alarmed. Simon shook his head. No, the documentation is clear, and I've already filed injunctions preventing him from accessing any further funds. But he'll try everything he can. Including throwing me under the bus, Amber said quietly. When everyone turned to look at her, she explained, Mom just texted me. She wants me to make a public statement saying that I demanded the expensive wedding, that they felt pressured into it, and that I had no knowledge of Ethan's condition. She showed them the message on her phone, disgust evident in her expression. Would you do that? Zinnia asked, studying her sister carefully. Amber met her gaze directly. No, not anymore. She turned to Bernard. I want to help make this right. Tell me what to do. Bernard's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he recovered quickly. First, we need to secure all the evidence before Richard can destroy anything. Then we file formal charges, both civil and criminal. The civil case addresses the stolen money. The criminal case addresses the fraud. And what about... Amber gestured vaguely at herself at the wedding that wasn't going to happen, at the life she had believed was hers. That depends on you, Bernard said frankly. You're an adult, Amber. You've benefited from Richard and Eleanor's favoritism and indirectly from their financial misconduct. But you weren't legally culpable unless you knowingly participated. I didn't, Amber assured him. But I'm not innocent either. I accepted everything they gave me without question, even when it was clearly excessive. She took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. I want to help make amends, to Zinnia, to Ethan, to the family trust, whatever it takes. Zinnia stared at her sister, seeing her truly, for perhaps the first time. Not as the golden child, not as the favored daughter, but as a woman capable of acknowledging her complicity and choosing a different path. It won't be easy, Zinnia warned her. Mom and Dad will see it as the ultimate betrayal. Your social circle, the people who are coming to the wedding, they might distance themselves when this gets messy. Let them, Amber said, with surprising resolve. Maybe it's time I found out who my real friends are anyway. She hesitated, then added more softly, and maybe it's time I tried to be a real sister too. If you'll give me the chance. The offer hung in the air between them, fragile, unexpected, but sincere. Zinnia thought of all the years of hurt, of feeling less than, of watching Amber receive everything while she struggled. Forgiveness wouldn't come overnight. Trust would take even longer. But the fact that Amber was here, choosing justice over privilege, was a start. One step at a time, Zinnia said. Finally, not quite an acceptance, but not a rejection either. Bernard cleared his throat, bringing the focus back to practical matters. We need to move quickly. Richard is already making calls, trying to mobilize allies. By morning, he'll have a strategy in place. Then we need one too, Marcus said firmly, and it needs to be airtight. As they began to plan their next moves, Zinnia found herself in the strange position of working alongside the sister who had been her rival for so long. The golden child had fallen, but from the ruins emerged something unexpected, a woman with the courage to face hard truths and the will to change. Whether this new version of Amber would endure the challenges ahead remained to be seen, but for the first time, Zinnia allowed herself to hope. The Calloway family would never be the same after tonight. But perhaps Zinnia thought, as she watched her son sleeping peacefully in the next room, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. 1 year later, Zinnia stood in the lobby of the newly renamed Callaway Wright Financial Group, watching as workers carefully installed the updated company logo on the wall behind the reception desk. The rebranding was the final visible step in a transformation that had begun that fateful night in Scotland when the family's secrets had exploded into public view. The aftermath had been as messy as expected. Richard and Eleanor had initially doubled down on their denials, hiring a crisis management team and attempting to paint Zinnia and Bernard as vindictive family members, trying to damage the Callaway name out of jealousy. But evidence doesn't lie, and there was plenty of it. The criminal investigation moved swiftly. With Amber's unexpected testimony supporting the case against her parents, Richard and Eleanor found themselves isolated, their social connections evaporating as the extent of their financial misconduct became clear. Richard was eventually charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Rather than face a public trial that would have exposed even more family secrets, he accepted a plea deal: full restitution of the stolen funds, surrender of his professional licenses, and 18 months in a minimum security facility. Eleanor avoided jail time but was not spared the social consequences. The charity boards she had once dominated asked for her resignation. The elite social circles that had been the center of her identity closed ranks against her. The woman who had planned the wedding of the season couldn't even get a reservation at her favorite restaurants anymore. Bernard, true to his word, reorganized the family business with Zinnia as the new CEO. Her background in publishing might have seemed an unlikely preparation for leading a financial firm, but her intelligence, integrity, and vision quickly proved the wisdom of Bernard's choice. Under her leadership, the company pivoted toward more ethical investment practices while maintaining profitability, earning industry recognition for innovation in sustainable finance. Marcus continued teaching but also established a foundation in Ethan's name to help families facing similar medical crises, children needing treatments not covered by insurance. The foundation was funded in part by the restitution from Richard and Eleanor, transforming ill-gotten gains into a force for good. And Amber, her transformation had perhaps been the most surprising of all. After the scandal broke and her wedding was called off, she faced a choice: cling to the remnants of her privileged life or embrace the painful truth and start anew. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she chose the latter. She voluntarily returned the gifts, jewelry, and property she had received from her parents over the years, contributing them to the restitution fund. She left her prestigious law firm where she admitted her position had been secured more through her father's connections than her own merit, and took a job with the district attorney's office specializing in financial crimes. The salary was a fraction of what she had earned before, but the work brought a satisfaction she had never known. Most significantly, Amber had begun the slow, difficult work of building a genuine relationship with Zinnia, Marcus, and Ethan. There were awkward moments, painful conversations, and occasional setbacks, but the foundation was there, a willingness on both sides to move beyond the toxic dynamic Richard and Eleanor had created. On Amber's coming for dinner tonight, Ethan announced, jolting Zinnia from her reflections. At 7, now fully recovered from his illness, he bounced with energy beside her. She promised to help me with my science project. That's right, Zinnia smiled, ruffling his hair. And Grandpa Bernard might stop by for dessert if his flight gets in on time. They exited the building into the bright spring sunshine. As they walked toward their car, Zinnia's phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor, a rare occurrence these days. Since Richard had gone to prison, Eleanor had been living in a small condo the family mansion sold as part of the restitution agreement. The text was brief: thinking of you today. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I am truly sorry. Zinnia stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. The apology was a step small, perhaps too late, but sincere in a way Eleanor had never been before. Whether it would lead to any kind of reconciliation remained to be seen. For now, Zinnia was focused on the family she had built and strengthened through the crucible of the past year. "Mom," Ethan tugged at her hand. "Are you okay?" Zinnia pocketed her phone and smiled down at her son, healthy, happy with his whole life ahead of him thanks to treatment that had ultimately transformed not just his health but their entire family. "I'm better than okay," she told him truthfully. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Later that evening, as Zinnia watched Amber helping Ethan with his project, their heads bent together in concentration, she reflected on the long journey that had brought them here. The parents who should have protected Ethan had chosen status over his life. The sister who had been elevated at Zinnia's expense had found her own path to redemption. The family name that had once been synonymous with wealth and social standing now stood for something far more valuable: integrity, compassion, and the courage to stand up for what was right. Justice, Zinnia had learned, didn't always come in the form you expected. Sometimes it arrived through public scandal rather than private confrontation. Sometimes it required the collapse of what was familiar before something better could be built. And sometimes, most surprisingly of all, it offered not just retribution, but redemption, the chance for wounded relationships to heal in ways that had once seemed impossible. Hey everyone, as my story comes to a close, I want to thank you for taking this journey with me. Has anyone in your family ever chosen status or appearances over doing what was right? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. This whole ordeal taught me that sometimes the family we choose is more loyal than the one we're born into. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family justice and healing. Share this with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening to my family story of betrayal and ultimate redemption. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways, but justice always finds its path.